with the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. Before we get started and give a little more, a little deeper of an introduction, let's just go through a few of the housekeeping items for today's session. You may have just heard that we are recording this for the benefit of others that weren't able to attend. Your default is that you are muted. Everyone is muted by the format of the meeting. If you want to use automated closed captions, you can do that. You should be able to find the show captions option in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen. We'll be sending out the slides afterward to everyone that registered. And as we go, we invite you to put questions in the Q&A. Alexander Andos will be, she'll talk about that a little bit more, but she'll be tracking those, and we'll be saving some time for Q&A at the end. We have a poll here that is active right now to give you an opportunity to tell us who you are kind of by role. And so we'd love for you to fill that in and let us see who's with us in terms of where you're coming from. But also, if you want to say specifically who you are, feel free to use the chat to do that and to tell everyone that you're here. We'll give it a moment, and then we'll see the results of the roles poll, not the roles poll, the roles poll. Take a moment for that, and I think is Ben driving that to release that when we're ready.
Yep, we got 17 out of 20. 85% of our folks have completed it. So one more second here, and then we'll go ahead and end it.
All right. Terrific. So in review, by type of employment, biggest chunk is government, which makes sense. We're going to be talking about different roles and the different needs of that I think government has in this EV infrastructure conversation. But and then we've got a mix of transportation, sustainability, and planning folks that are attending. Besides government, we also have some energy and some nonprofit in the room. We don't have anyone from apartment buildings or developers. That's certainly an audience that we're interested in engaging and in ongoing opportunity for us in our communications on this topic. Why don't we roll ahead? Thank you for doing that. Just to take another moment to explain why we're doing this and to give a little bit of framing on the conversation. Again, I'm Jason Valerius, Executive Director of the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. This webinar is part of a series that the RPC and the MPO, the Greater Madison Metropolitan Planning Organization, have been running together. The RPC focuses primarily on land use planning and natural resource protection throughout and beyond Dane County, while the MPO focuses on all things transportation in Dane County. These topics are closely linked, as I expect many of you recognize, and so are our organizations. We share resources, we share office space, we collaborate on communications like this, and we even share some staff. So thank you to our joint communications specialist, Kayla Haas, who helped to organize today's event. Sometimes our roles as organizations are about finding ways to lead the way on important issues, working to identify challenges in communities, to identify what people are interested in, finding solutions that residents support, and directing resources toward those solutions. Other times we feel like we are just trying to help the region adapt to things that are kind of happening to us and around us. And I'd say that this topic, electric vehicle infrastructure, is both of those things. It's something that we want because we're actively working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by influencing how we live and work and travel through the region. It's also something that's happening to us and around us. The market for vehicles is moving to electric. for a variety of reasons, and our communities need to adapt accordingly. So CARPC has a regional development framework that guides the physical development of the region, implemented through local planning processes and decisions. So we support local staff and officials. The MPO has a regional transportation plan that guides the development of an integrated multimodal transportation system across the region. These plans were developed in parallel, both adopted in 2022, and both based on a bunch of public input. They're long-range big picture plans, and they need to be supplemented by deeper dives into specific topics, and that's exactly what we're getting into today. So our primary presenter is the MPO Transportation Planner, Bill Holloway, but first I'm going to pass the mic to MPO Executive Director, Alexander Andros.
All right, thank you, Jason. So if you look at our organizations, I'm representing the one on the left, but as Jason alluded to, obviously transportation is a critical part of planning, land use planning, and a broad array of topics. For those who don't already know me, I've been in this position less than a year, but I've been doing planning work in Wisconsin and the Madison region, especially since about 1994, to be exact. And this is a topic that's one of those interesting things in sort of how infrastructure changes over the years. I think broadband is something that is become a necessity as life goes on and as things have changed. And I think the EV charging topic that we're discussing today fits right into that as well. In order for something to work well and to take advantage of the positives of these things, we need to have these systems in place. And I didn't know a tremendous amount, but fortunately, Bill Holloway does, and put together a really excellent program and a lot of research and put it together. So I'm really pleased to see this and to see more people getting interested in it, because I think there's a lot to learn about the topic. So having said that, I'm going to introduce Bill next. But before I do, we have a second poll, which sort of outlines sort of what you all who are here today, what are you most interested in learning about? Just so I can have that in mind, as I'm also going to be sort of minding the Q&A questions so that we can discuss those at the end. So take a few moments and fill that out.
Almost 90% of folks have selected at least one answer here. Still doing a few
Still
more.
going.
Give everybody a couple more seconds to click some options.
Thanks, Ben. All right, well, the great news about this is we are going to talk a little bit about all of these things, but it is good to know, and especially looking at who's here today, it makes sense looking at policies and talking about potential locations, and we are going to see that. In fact, we have lots of maps to share. So thank you, that's good to know. And I will pass it off to Bill, and he can get going on our presentation. And feel free to share if you do have questions or comments, provide those in the Q&A rather than in the chat. I don't think you should be able to find that pretty easily, and I'll be watching those, and then we'll be ready to discuss those towards the end.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So in 2022, the MPO began work on a plan to help local governments understand and adjust to the ongoing shift towards electric vehicles, or EVs. The final plan was approved by the MPO board in February, and it should be available within the next week or two on the MPO website. We're just finishing up some design issues on that. Today, I'll be discussing the different levels of EV charging, how charging needs vary by location, and priority locations for different types of charging infrastructure in the county. Then I'll go over some of the basic considerations for new charging infrastructure installations, best practices for communities to ensure that charging infrastructure is available for everyone who needs it, and some potential funding sources. While EVs offer numerous benefits in terms of performance and convenience, the most important benefit of EVs from a societal perspective are in the areas of public health, environmental sustainability, and the economy. In general, total greenhouse gas emissions generated from the production and operation of electric vehicles are less than half of that of equivalent conventional vehicles. Beyond greenhouse gases, a shift towards EVs can also eliminate tailpipe emissions that harm human health. In addition, fuel and maintenance costs are much lower for EVs than fossil fueled vehicles. There are 3 charging levels ranging from level 1 to level 3. Charging speed is determined by the power supplied by the charger, which varies within each level, EV battery size and maximum charging speed, and other factors. Level 1 is the slowest charging level, which uses a standard residential wall outlet. Level 2 is the most common type of public or shared charging infrastructure. It requires the same 240-volt service used by refrigerators and laundry machines. Level 3, also known as direct current fast charging, requires 480-volt service. It can charge a fully electric vehicle to 80% in less than an hour, but costs far more to install than lower charging levels. Not all EVs can charge at level 3 chargers. Most plug-in hybrids can only charge at a level 1 or level 2, and some fully electric vehicles, particularly those made more than a few years ago, are also unable to use level 3 chargers. And this map shows the locations of existing level 2 and level 3 charging sites in Dane County. Unlike conventional vehicles that need to visit gas stations to refuel, EV charging infrastructure can be installed virtually anywhere, but locations can be divided into 3 broad categories. Residences are by far the most important, accounting for nearly 90% of all EV charging. People who have a place to park at home where they can charge their vehicle have access to the cheapest and most convenient charging method. Unfortunately, people living in multifamily housing often lack a place to charge their vehicles at home. This makes EV ownership more costly and less convenient. As increasing numbers of lower cost used EVs enter the market, it's important from both a social justice and sustainability perspective to increase access to residential charging for people who currently lack it. Charging infrastructure in employment areas has commonly been provided in business-owned parking lots to serve normally higher-income office workers. This is what has historically been known as workplace charging. As more lower-income people purchase EVs in the coming years, there will be a need for more charging infrastructure to serve workers in other types of occupations who may be unable to charge their vehicles at home. Much of this infrastructure will be needed in shared parking facilities in downtowns and malls, where it can serve retail and other non-office workers as well as visitors. Because workers generally leave their cars parked for at least several hours, level 2 charging is sufficient. Corridor and community charging encompasses all other locations. Community charging includes charging infrastructure in parking facilities serving commercial areas, libraries, parks, and other community destinations. Corridor charging consists of chargers located at intervals along highways to facilitate long-distance travel by EVs. In locations where visitors are expected to spend more than an hour or so, level 2 charging is often sufficient. Level 3 chargers are needed to serve travelers making quick stops on long-distance trips and for ride-hail and delivery drivers that need to refuel during their work shifts. Dane County is a hotbed of EV adoption and EV infrastructure in Wisconsin, but the transition to electric vehicles is just beginning. As of January 2023, less than 1% of registered vehicles in Dane County were electric, but the number of EVs in the county is expected to skyrocket over the next few decades. Projections suggest that EVs will make up roughly 15% of registered vehicles in the county by 2030, and will account for somewhere between 30 and 80% of vehicles by 2050. While the county currently exceeds the Department of Energy's recommended minimum number of public level 2 and 3 charging ports, it will need more to meet future demand. The map on the left here shows multifamily housing density, and the map on the right shows multifamily housing land use. The blue dots are public charging stations. Multifamily units in downtown Madison have pretty good access to public charging infrastructure. However, many areas with substantial concentrations of multifamily units have no public charging infrastructure nearby. While a small number of newer and more upscale multifamily buildings have charging infrastructure on site, the vast majority do not. This is a problem because most EV drivers do nearly all their charging at home. Enabling people who live in multifamily housing units to charge their vehicles at home makes EV ownership more affordable and convenient. As Dane County continues to grow, an increasing share of housing is expected to be made up of units in multifamily buildings. The city of Madison is at the forefront of this trend. Multifamily units made up about 90% of new housing units in 2021, as shown in the bar chart. The map shows the location of single and multifamily housing units approved in 2020 and 2021. The green dots on the map show where new single-family housing is being built, and the red dots indicate locations of new multifamily housing developments. As the county's population continues to grow in the coming years, this pattern will likely repeat itself in other communities. Level 2 charging infrastructure and other locations where cars are parked for extended periods can provide access to affordable charging for people who cannot charge at home. Level 2 charging is much cheaper than level 3, but since it requires several hours to provide a full charge, it's best suited for places like work sites, multimodal hubs, such as park and ride lots and transit stops, and other places where people tend to park for longer periods. Level 3 fast charging is critical for long distance travelers so that they can quickly charge their vehicles and get back on the road. Ensuring that reliable level 3 charging infrastructure is available at regular intervals along key travel routes so EV drivers don't become stranded with empty batteries is one of the most important ways to combat the range anxiety that makes people reluctant to buy an EV. While most discussion about level 3 charging concerns long distance travel, ride-hailing drivers working for companies like Uber and Lyft also have a high demand for fast charging. In 2022, Uber reported that their drivers in the US were 8 times as likely to use EVs as the general public. Ride-hailing drivers opt for EVs primarily due to their much lower operating costs. However, as part of their goals to be carbon neutral by 2030, both Uber and Lyft also offer incentives for drivers to transition to electric vehicles. Ride-hail drivers that use EVs are major users of public level 3 charging infrastructure. The chart here shows the average amount and source of energy used for EV charging by ride-hail drivers with and without level 2 chargers at home. Part-time drivers who work up to 25 hours a week can often satisfy their charging needs using only a level 2 charger at home. However, full-time drivers rely on level 3 chargers for more than half of their charging, even if they have a level 2 charger at home. Ride-hail drivers without access to a level 2 charger at home normally charge exclusively at level 3 chargers. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory recently projected that by 2030, ride-hail drivers would account for 20% of all level 3 charging demand in the US. Local delivery drivers who use EVs are likely to exhibit a similarly high level of level 3 charger usage. While Dane County currently exceeds the recommended minimum number of public level 2 and level 3 charging stations, we still have some important gaps. The tan areas shown on the map are areas with multifamily housing and no nearby public charging installations. The red outlines show the EJ or environmental justice priority areas. These are areas with higher than average concentrations of low income and minority residents. People living in apartment buildings and houses that lack off-street parking often have no way to charge their cars at home. And while a small number of apartment buildings in these areas may have charging facilities for residents, the vast majority don't. As used EVs become more widely available and more accessible to people with low incomes, we need to make sure that a lack of access to residential charging does not become a barrier to ownership. Serve long distance travelers and ride-hailing and delivery drivers who often need to charge on the go will need additional level 3 chargers throughout the county. Additional fast chargers will make long trips in EVs easier, support the growing demand for fast charging from ride-hail and delivery drivers, and will facilitate the transition to EVs more broadly. Secondary needs include chargers serving work sites, multimodal hubs such as park and ride lots, and other destinations where people leave their cars parked for long periods, as well as rural communities that lack charging infrastructure. So where should new charging infrastructure be placed? The greatest need for new level 2 chargers is residential areas where people currently cannot charge their vehicles. These could be private chargers in apartment building parking lots, public charging stations, or street side chargers, either freestanding chargers or those mounted on streetlight or utility poles. Level 2 chargers are also needed in employment areas where employees park for the length of their workday. These could be either private chargers located in business parking lots or public chargers in parking facilities serving commercial areas. Public chargers in these areas would provide charging access to employees who can't charge their vehicles at home and would provide an additional charging option for shoppers. To identify suitable areas for level 3 charging infrastructure, we conducted an analysis of 123 zones, encompassing nearly every cluster of commercial and employment activity in the county. Our goal was to identify a set of locations across the county where there would be enough demand to support the installation of level 3 charging infrastructure, and where new infrastructure would be positioned to serve the needs of long-distance travelers, ride-hail and delivery drivers, and residents of rural areas where public charging infrastructure is scarce. We used data from Streetlight, a company that provides travel data primarily gleaned from information collected from connected vehicles and location-based services on cell phones. Location-based services include all of the apps on your phone that collect data about your location. Anything from Facebook to Google Maps to the Home Depot app. Streetlight processes anonymized location data using algorithms to distinguish different types of vehicles and to estimate their speed, travel routes, origins and destinations, and other information. Our analysis focused on 4 key measures about each zone gleaned from Streetlight data: the number of vehicles stopping, the length of their trips, the number of vehicles passing through or within a quarter mile, and the length of time vehicles were stopped. In addition, we considered each zone's location in relation to existing level 3 charging stations and other priority areas. This map shows the number of vehicles stopping each day in each zone. This is one measure of potential demand for new charging infrastructure. Because level 3 infrastructure is so expensive to install, sufficient demand is critical to ensuring that the investment is worthwhile. This map details the percentage of trips over 50 miles starting and ending in each zone. Trip length is a key factor in assessing locations for charging infrastructure, because people on short trips are much more likely to just charge their vehicles at home rather than at a public charger. And this map shows the average daily traffic passing through or within a quarter mile of each zone. Large numbers of vehicles passing may indicate potential demand for fast charging infrastructure. New level 3 chargers may attract some passing drivers who would not otherwise stop. The last element of our Streetlight travel data analysis was focused on dwell times, or how long vehicles are stopped in each zone. And this map shows the average number of stops per day in each zone that are 30 minutes or less. Unlike the other data we used from Streetlight, dwell time was not one of their standard measures and required a separate contract, which limited us to data for 100 zones. The 23 excluded zones were generally made up of industrial areas, where short stops were expected to be less common. Following this analysis and considering the locations of existing level 3 chargers, we identified 13 priority zones for level 3 charging. Zones like the exit 126 area and the Highway 19 corridor along the interstate north of Madison were shoe-ins, checking almost every box. Lots of short stops, lots of passing traffic, and lots of travelers making long trips. Others, such as Black Earth, have less traffic stopping and passing by, but are distant from existing level 3 chargers and are well positioned to serve long distance travelers, as well as rural residents in the area who may be unable to charge at home. You'll notice that some of these zones have green dots in or near them. These are level 2 chargers, which can serve employees in these areas during their work shifts and can allow visitors to top off their charge if needed. However, they cannot provide the quick charging needed by drivers that need to get back on the road quickly. Level 3 charging infrastructure located in these zones would make it easier to use EVs for long-distance travel, ride-hailing and deliveries, and would also provide additional charging capacity in rural areas. Now we'll go through the EV charging infrastructure nuts and bolts. After that, we'll get into some of the policy and planning tools that communities can use to increase the availability of charging infrastructure. Public charging stations are generally owned and/or operated by private charging network companies. Even free charging stations often require a network membership to charge. Networks process payment, track usage, and provide customer support. They may also partner with site hosts to help plan and construct the charging site, develop charging station policies, and provide maintenance or other services. Non-networked stations are not connected to the internet and cannot accept payments or offer advanced monitoring. Maintenance is a huge issue, with some studies finding that more than a quarter of non-Tesla public chargers are inoperable. Tesla charging stations are much more reliable than those operated by other networks and are generally functioning more than 95% of the time. Along with regular wear and tear, one of the most common and frustrating issues cited by our planned steering committee members was that chargers in perfect condition are rendered inoperable if they cannot connect to their charging network due to Wi-Fi or mobile network connection problems. When problems arise, maintenance is often delayed due to a shortage of replacement parts and a lack of maintenance workers. Site owners hosting chargers who have maintenance contracts with service providers still often face delays in service or disagreements about the extent of their coverage. This has spurred the development of new dedicated EV infrastructure maintenance companies, such as Charger Help. And these are the different connector types. Non-Tesla vehicles use a J1772 plug for level 1 and 2 charging. CCS connectors are now the standard non-Tesla fast charging plug. The CHAdeMO connector is less common and among new cars is only used on the Nissan Leaf. All Tesla vehicles come standard with an adapter that allows them to charge using J1772 connectors. And there are other adapters that can allow them to charge using non-Tesla fast chargers. Non-Tesla vehicles cannot normally charge at Tesla chargers. However, Tesla has pledged to open at least 7,500 of its chargers, 3,500 of which will be level 3 fast chargers, to non-Tesla EVs by the end of the year. Tesla has already started opening some of its charging stations to non-Tesla vehicles. Right now, most non-Teslas need to use adapters that convert their CCS plugs to the Tesla type. Last year, most major automakers selling EVs in the US announced that they would be adopting the Tesla connector, since renamed the North American Charging Standard, or NACS connector, on their vehicles beginning in the 2025 model year. The much greater reliability of the Tesla charging network is one of the primary reasons that other automakers have been so eager to adopt the NACS connector. Many charging network operators have followed suit and will be equipping their charging stations with NACS connectors. I expect that the NACS connector will soon be the dominant plug type in the US. The above-ground elements of the charging site, charging infrastructure, maintenance, and communications contracts and management software, typically only account for 10 to 30% of total project costs. The larger share of costs are due to less visible infrastructure and installation work, including trenching for conduit and wiring, electrical grid upgrades, and soft costs associated with planning and permitting. Charging infrastructure is either owned by the owner of the charging site or by a third party, often a utility or a charging network operator. There are a number of different types of arrangements that entail different levels of responsibility for maintenance and operating expenses, with varying levels of financial risk and reward for site owners, with some of the most common types of arrangements shown here. Under an own and operate model, which is most common in public sector settings, the client provides space for the provider to install and operate charging stations. The provider then takes all responsibility for operations and maintenance and keeps all of the revenue that's generated from charging fees. There are a number of ways to reduce the cost of charging infrastructure installations. Buying charging infrastructure in bulk may lower per unit costs. Consolidating charging infrastructure into a smaller number of larger charging stations can reduce costs by spreading the fixed site preparation and utility connection costs across more chargers and reducing the number of sites that maintenance personnel need to visit. Locating charging infrastructure where there's a short, simple conduit path to the utility connection can dramatically lower the cost of trenching and wiring. Equipping new charging sites with the necessary conduit, grid capacity, and other required underground infrastructure to enable higher powered chargers to be added later reduces future installation costs. And installing charging infrastructure during the construction helps to reduce design and installation costs and avoids the need to dig trenches through existing parking lots. To provide consistency to travelers and improve fairness for consumers, the federal government requires that federally funded EV charging infrastructure calculate charging fees by kilowatt hours of energy used rather than by time spent charging. Because different vehicles can accept vastly different levels of power from EV charging infrastructure when charging fees are based on time rather than kilowatt hours, they pay much different rates for the power received. This discrepancy disadvantages the low-income EV drivers because older, less expensive vehicles, which usually cannot accept as fast of a charge, cost more to charge when fees are based on time rather than energy used. The difference in charging speeds is most pronounced when it comes to level 3 or DC fast charging. As shown here, some new luxury vehicles can gain 100 miles of charge in as little as 8 minutes, while other more affordable vehicles may require nearly 45 minutes for the same charge. Differences between different types of vehicles are less pronounced in the case of level 2 charging, with the fastest charging vehicles able to charge about twice as fast as the slowest. Currently, Wisconsin state law prohibits anyone other than utilities from charging fees based on electricity usage. EV charging stations in the state generally base fees on time spent charging rather than kilowatt hours consumed. Last week, a bill to allow EV charging fees based on kilowatt hours passed the state legislature, and the governor is expected to sign it. One way to provide residential charging access to people who lack off-street parking is to install public chargers that can serve curbside parking spaces. Curbside charging is done with either pole-mounted or freestanding chargers. Pole-mounted chargers, charging infrastructure mounted on streetlight or utility poles, can be a flexible and low-cost way to provide on-street infrastructure. MG&E currently has a pilot program to test pole-mounted chargers in the Madison area, and the first was installed on Madison's east side in the Darbo-Worthington neighborhood last year. Freestanding chargers are another curbside charging option. While these may be more costly to install and harder to move than those mounted on streetlight or utility poles, they can be installed in more locations because they don't require an existing pole. At least one company, It's Electric, works with adjacent property owners to provide power to the charger from their building. The company gets the necessary permits, installs the charger at their own expense, and provides the property owner a share of the income generated by the charger. Now we'll get into some strategies communities can use to increase the availability of EV charging infrastructure. Ensuring adequate EV charging infrastructure to support the expected growth in the number of EVs over the coming decades will require action from both the public and private sectors. Much of the work in the public sector side will entail the use of policy and planning tools to efficiently channel private sector funding for charging infrastructure towards the locations where it's most needed. Comprehensive plans form the bedrock of local transportation and land use decision-making. Identifying EVs as a key part of local transportation strategy provides a basis for tailoring zoning and other ordinances to support the development of EV charging infrastructure. Both the Dane County Climate Action Plan and the MPO's Connect Greater Madison 2050 Regional Transportation Plan have identified transitioning to EVs as a key part of reducing emissions and slowing climate change. Zoning codes that explicitly address EV charging infrastructure reduce confusion for installers and government officials, making installation faster and more efficient. EV charging related issues that can be dealt with in the zoning code include where chargers are permitted by right or conditionally, charging power levels allowed in different locations, requirements that parking areas be equipped with EV chargers or be ready for their future installation, site design guidelines, and incentives for installation. The cities of Madison and Verona have both adopted requirements for EV infrastructure and parking facilities. The City of Madison's policy adopted in 2021 requires that certain new, expanded, or significantly reconstructed parking facilities must include parking spaces that are EV ready, prepared for the future installation of EV charging infrastructure, as well as parking spaces equipped with fully installed charging infrastructure. As shown in the table on the left, the required percentage of EV ready and EV installed spaces increases every 5 years. The table on the right shows the minimum number of ADA accessible charging spaces. These requirements for EV installed spaces will likely be preempted by legislation that recently passed the legislature and is expected to be signed by the governor. This legislation, the same legislation that will allow charging fees to be based on energy consumed rather than time spent charging, includes an amendment that will also prohibit local governments from requiring the installation of EV charging stations. It is unclear whether this prohibition will also apply to requirements for EV-ready spaces as well as EV-installed spaces. Local parking ordinances set the terms of use for publicly accessible parking facilities, including curbside parking spaces. Because EVs need to park in order to charge, it's important to ensure that these ordinances support community EV charging goals. Drivers who lack off-street parking at their homes sometimes use extension cords to provide their vehicles with a level 1 charge while parked along the side of the street, often in violation of local ordinances. Some communities, however, have legalized the practice, implementing regulations such as requiring accessible ramp covers over the cord to ensure that it's done safely. Municipalities can also support the expansion of EV charging infrastructure by siting charging infrastructure in municipal parking facilities. The cities of Madison, Fitchburg, Monona, and Middleton, as well as Dane County, have all partnered with the MG&E to place public charging infrastructure in their parking facilities. MG&E, Alliant, and WPPI all have programs in place to support and encourage the transition to electric vehicles, promoting EVs via websites, operating EV charging stations, providing rebates and offering leasing options for residential EV charging infrastructure, and offering managed charging programs that allow customers to save money by scheduling their vehicles charged for off-peak times later at night. Now we'll talk a little bit about how EV infrastructure is funded. While communities have a major part to play in ensuring that their plans, policies, and regulations support the expansion of EV charging infrastructure, they are not expected to play a major role in funding it. Funding will primarily come from individuals who install charging infrastructure at home for personal use, and businesses, including utilities and charging networks that install level 2 and 3 chargers to serve employees, attract customers, meet sustainability and equity goals, and generate revenues. The federal government has a number of programs that provide grants and tax credits for new charging infrastructure. 3 big federal programs that can fund new EV charging infrastructure were created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The goal of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, the most well-known of the 3, is to ensure the availability of fast charging infrastructure along key highway corridors by providing grants of up to 80% of project costs for qualifying level 3 charging installations. Grant applicants, which must be businesses, nonprofits, or tribes, apply directly to WISDOT for funding. Wisconsin's Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment, or WEVI plan, the state's implementation plan for the federal NEVI program, identifies existing fast charging stations that qualify under the program and eligible locations for new charging stations. This WEVI plan map details potential sites for new NEVI-funded high-speed charging infrastructure in the state. Along each corridor, only 1 location in each color group would be eligible for funding. The orange dot in Mount Horeb and the purple dot in Edgerton are the only eligible locations for NEVI-funded charging infrastructure in Dane County. The federal rules governing the carbon reduction program would allow funding to go towards EV charging infrastructure, but Wisconsin's Joint Finance Committee placed additional restrictions on the funding, and EV infrastructure is no longer eligible. The Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program is designed to provide funding for new EV charging infrastructure along key highway corridors and in communities. CFI grant applications are submitted to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Unlike NEVI grants, state, local, or tribal government entities are the only groups eligible to apply for CFI grants. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes programs that can be used to fund EV infrastructure. One of these, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Tax Credit, is the most straightforward. It offers businesses located in rural and low-income census tracts tax credits of up to 30% of the cost of charging station installation, up to a maximum credit of $100,000. The tax credit is also available to individuals installing charging infrastructure at home, up to a maximum credit of $1,000. There are other IRA programs under which EV infrastructure is eligible for grant funding, but they tend to be less direct and more flexible, with funds directed towards state and local governments or nonprofit organizations that provide funding to recipients. And here are the areas eligible for the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Tax Credit. The map on the left shows these areas with the multifamily EV charging zones, areas near multifamily housing that do not have public charging infrastructure nearby. And the map on the right shows these same areas with the level 3 charging priority zones. The white areas are the only areas that are not eligible for the 30% tax credit on charging infrastructure. Thank you. The plan, as I mentioned, is going through some final design revisions right now, and it should be ready within the next week or so. When it's ready, we'll send everyone registered for this webinar a link and post it on our website. Now I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You could just enter those in the Q&A. It was that good, Bill. There's no questions.
All right.
It's that good.
I see a question here. Can you re-clarify the NEVI grant eligibility in Dane County? Yes, I can. I'm gonna share my screen again here. I should have left that up. And here we go. All right. So the NEVI grants, the idea is you see these green lines. Those are the designated alternative fuel corridors. So those have been identified by the state as sort of the key corridors throughout the state where they want to make sure that there are charging stations along that corridor within about every 50 miles or so. So the orange dot with the black circle around it, let me see if I can, I wonder if I can get, oh yeah, I got a little pen here. So this orange dot here that I'm circling, this is the charging station over at the Walmart on Nakusa Road on Madison's east side. So they've got this shaded circle that's a 25-mile radius outside that station at the Walmart that complies with the NEVI regulations, that it has at least 4 chargers that are powered at least 150 kilowatts and that have CCS style plugs. That's the basic regulation for these. Since that meets those terms, then we have this circle, this 25-mile radius, where they say they generally don't want other chargers around here within that circle. Now, some of these are a little bit inside the circle, but that's just sort of because you have these other areas that are still underserved. You can see this area with the purple here and the yellow here, and then this area, of course, on the west of Dane County. So each of the dots, the colored dots you see here, are highway exits where there are existing businesses that indicate there's sufficient electrical capacity to support the installation of these chargers. And they figure within each color group, just one of these locations would be selected. So here, these purple ones, you could put one in Edgerton down here at the very southeast corner of the county, or they could be as far south as down here in sort of the middle of Rock County. One of these sites will at some point probably be funded, get NEVI funding to build a fast charging site. This area to the west of Dane County, the only highway exit that they identified as meeting the likely electrical capacity requirements to support the charging infrastructure is this one here in Mount Horeb. So I expect at some point that'll get funded. But as you can see, there's no other of these colored dots within Dane County that are identified as a potential location.
So Bill, just to follow up, then that would mean the follow-up question about if someone wanted to install level 3 charger, in this case, in the chat box at 19, so into Forest at Highway 19, they wouldn't be eligible because there's no dot there, basically.
That's right.
Right.
They wouldn't be eligible for the NEVI funding, but
right.
there certainly is. They would be eligible for, so some of these other sources, they would be eligible there for the 30% tax credit on the cost of and putting that in. That's the last maps I showed indicate that. And there are other sources. So we had the MPO partnered with the county and with a number of communities, as well as the University of Wisconsin and some nonprofit organizations, in applying for a charging and fueling infrastructure grant. And the idea there was it was for an $18 million project. The grant would have covered 15 million of that. And then with that money, we would have been directing that towards various charging locations. So most would have been level 2, probably serving residential areas, but some of that money would have gone to help fund some additional fast charging in Dane County. But unfortunately, we were not selected there. However, there's still more money in that program that will be eligible in coming years. Maybe the next tranche will be eligible this year. So there should be more money coming along. On the other hand, I think a lot of level 3 chargers are going to be installed with private funding without additional help, except of course, I assume anyone who's eligible for that, the tax credit would just apply for that, but other sources may be a little harder to get.
And then another question relates to any model ordinances and policies that we can share. A good question. We had some, but then as Bill noted earlier, with the change in the state law, which was beneficial in some ways and maybe not so much in other ways, this is a really timely question. So anything further to provide on that?
Not much, just that this so the legislation that I mentioned there that is going before the governor soon, it's going to do a variety of things. Most importantly, it's going to allow charging charging fees to be based on energy consumed rather than time spent charging. That's a big equity issue. It's also crucial to enabling this funding for the NEVI program and really any other federal funding for chargers to come into the state. Without making that change, there would be no federal funding that could go towards chargers in Wisconsin. So that's a huge win for increasing the amount of charging infrastructure. But added on to that, there was a amendment in the assembly that says that local governments are not allowed to require the installation of charging stations in order to get zoning approval or other types of permitting and approvals. I can't remember the exact wording, but that is, it's interesting, and it remains to be seen. It looks like that is certain to be a problem for these EV installed spaces. I feel like if that goes through, I'm pretty sure these sections that I'm scribbling over are going to be eliminated. However, the EV ready aspect of this, EV ready just means that you have the wiring and the conduit, and you've got the sufficient electrical capacity. That is often the bulk of the cost of installing a charger. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is some sort of court, something goes to trial to sort of figure out, does this prohibition on requirements for charging stations also, does that include this other infrastructure that other than the station, all the supporting stuff, whether that's included or not. So that'll be a interesting thing to watch going forward.
And Bill, just so that you know, Evers did sign that bill yesterday.
Mhm.
Oh, it did. Okay,
Yeah.
well, breaking
If you
news.
look in
Right?
the chat, we just posted that, yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this works out.
So no, we don't, given all of that, we do not have any model. This slide had some examples of where places had them. This law just, came into being, and so we don't have any models since that time.
Right. Not for this, although there are a lot of these there are places that have done different, charging rules. Another thing that I mentioned was the idea of allowing people to run a cord across the sidewalk, and that to charge their EV. And there's a few places that have done that. I believe Portland, Seattle, the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. all have some version of that, with different levels of requirements. They all require that it's safely covered by a accessible little ramp cover, so people don't trip on the cord. But there's other safety regulations, and that's something when you're charging with a extension cord, there are a lot of mistakes someone could make that would make a safety issue, potential fires and stuff. So it's important that people take safety into account when they're doing that.
And then just to follow up, Brad, I see that, given that we just crossed out, this ordinance that we use as an example, does this mean that in this case, Verona's ordinance is no longer enforceable? And that is a good question, likely for an attorney, but it seems like that would be a concern and perhaps the intent of the change that was added.
Yes, I heard that it was the I believe the apartment association, or I may have the name wrong, some apartment owner industry group that had pushed for that change.
Mhm. Well, we have 5 minutes. Any more questions from anyone that we could help with? Or do our best?
Alex, there is another question in the Q&A.
Okay. Oh, it just popped in. So this question states, are there restrictions on local government zoning EV charging infrastructure for public use?
Yes.
Would they be eligible for these funding programs?
So yes, there are restrictions on that. Some of those were
Mhm.
actually included in this new legislation that the governor just signed. As I understand it, the local governments will still be allowed to own any charging infrastructure that they need to serve their own fleet, whatever level it is, that is fine. I think they're also allowed to own charging infrastructure that is open to the public for free, but they are not allowed to own charging infrastructure that where they charge people a fee to charge their vehicles. utilities that are sort of partially publicly owned, they are allowed to operate public charging stations and charge fees for use, as long as those fees do not go into the general fund of their of a municipality. And as I understand it, as I read that legislation, it definitely seems that local governments could still allocate space for charging stations to be put in. So I described that ownership model, which I'm forgetting the term here. Here we go. So this ownership model, this own and operate here, this is, it seems like what the city of Madison is currently doing, where they and other companies that have partnered with MG&E, where these local governments provide space, and then MG&E installs the charging station, handles all the operations and maintenance, and then they keep the revenue from the charging fees. I think that is all kosher with the new with this new legislation, but it's you just can't have the city or the local government actually making money from the charging. I think the idea, the goal of that part of the legislation is just to try and make sure that local governments aren't in competition with the private sector there.
And then a final one from someone, Ann, who works at a nonprofit located downtown Madison, is looking at installing a charger station on their property in tandem with a planned purchase of an EV. Should she have any concerns about doing that?
Oh, no, I think that should be very straightforward. And I spoke with a fellow in the city's building inspection group, and he said that they permit these things often and that it's a pretty straightforward process. As a nonprofit, not being a government entity, I think it should be totally fine. And certainly if you're installing it for your own personal use, if it's not going to be open to the public, it, I think, would be probably even easier. And so yeah, I think it should be pretty straightforward, but you might want to talk with MG&E about that. I know they have a variety of programs. In fact, just last month, I used one of their programs here that I sort of obliquely mentioned, where they installed a level 2 charger at my house, and then they just add an extra $20 on my electricity bill every month to sort of pay for that, which is really nice because then you don't have the big upfront expense. So they're a good partner. They're very interested in increasing the number of EVs and working with people to do that.
All right, well, I think we're exactly at 1 o'clock, so that's time.
All right.
Thank you all very much for attending. I hope you got a lot out of it. Jason, same as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.